I'm going to show you something that doesn't make sense. And once you see it, you're going to realize that everything you thought you knew about money is wrong. Here's the question. If every country in the world is in debt, who are they in debt to? Think about it. The United States owes $37 trillion. Japan owes over $10 trillion. China owes $14 trillion. Germany, France, Italy, the UK, every major economy is drowning in debt. The total global debt right now is over $315 trillion. That's almost 4 times the entire global GDP. So here's what doesn't make sense. If everyone owes money, who's getting paid? Where is all this debt owed to? Now, the simple answer is we owe it to each other. The US owes money to China. China owes money to Japan. Japan owes money to the US. It's all just circular, right? Except that's not actually true. And when you dig into where the debt really goes, you're going to discover something that changes everything. Because the real creditor isn't another country. It's not even a person or a group of people. The real creditor is a system that was designed to ensure that debt can never be fully repaid. And once you understand how it works, you'll understand why every country keeps borrowing more, why inflation never stops, and why the people at the top keep getting richer while everyone else falls further behind. Let me show you. Okay, let's start with the basics. When a country goes into debt, who do they borrow from? Most people think it's other countries. The US borrows from China. China borrows from Japan. It all balances out, right? Wrong. Here's the actual breakdown of who holds US debt right now. This is going to surprise you. Foreign governments hold about $8 trillion of US debt. That's only about 22% of the total. China holds about $800 billion. Japan holds about $1.1 trillion. So who holds the rest? The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, holds about $5 trillion. That's 13% of the total debt. But here's the big one. American institutions hold the rest. Mutual funds, pension funds, state and local governments, insurance companies, banks. In other words, the US government owes most of its debt to Americans. But wait, if Americans own the debt, where did Americans get the money to lend to the government? That's where it gets interesting. Here's what actually happens. And this is going to sound insane, but I promise you this is real. When the government needs money, they issue a bond, a treasury bond. It's basically an IOU. The government promises to pay you back with interest. Now, who buys these bonds? Banks buy them, pension funds buy them, insurance companies buy them, and the Federal Reserve buys them. But here's the question nobody asks. Where do these institutions get the money to buy government bonds? The banks create it. I'm not kidding. When a bank buys a government bond, they don't take money out of a vault somewhere. They just type numbers into a computer. They create a deposit out of thin air. This is called fractional reserve banking, and it's completely legal. Here's how it works. Let's say you deposit $1,000 into a bank. The bank is required to keep maybe 10% in reserve. That's $100. The other $900, they can lend it out. But here's the trick. When they lend out that $900, they just created $900 out of nothing. Now, the person who borrowed that $900 deposits it in their bank. That bank keeps $90 and lends out $810. That gets deposited. The next bank lends out $729. From your original $1,000 deposit, the banking system just created $9,000 in new money. That's not a theory. That's how the system works. And when banks buy government bonds, they're doing the same thing. They're creating money out of nothing and lending it to the government. So, let me ask you again, if the money is created out of nothing, who is the real creditor? Here's where this gets really dark. The Federal Reserve is a central bank. Most people think it's part of the government. It's not. The Federal Reserve is a private institution. It's owned by member banks. It operates independently of Congress and has the power to create unlimited amounts of money. When the government needs money and can't find enough buyers for their bonds, who steps in? The Federal Reserve. The Fed creates money out of thin air and buys government bonds. This is called quantitative easing, or money printing, or debt monetization. It's all the same thing. The Fed creates money, gives it to the government, and the government now owes that money back to the Fed, plus interest. But wait, where did the Fed get that money? Nowhere. They created it, with a keystroke. So the government borrows money that didn't exist, pays interest on money that didn't exist, and now owes a debt that can never be fully repaid because the money to pay it back doesn't exist either. Unless they create more debt. Do you see the problem? The debt can never be paid off. The system is designed so that debt only grows. Every dollar in existence is loaned into existence, which means every dollar comes with interest attached, but the interest was never created. So the only way to pay the interest is to borrow more money, which creates more interest, which requires more borrowing. It's an infinite loop, and the Federal Reserve is at the center of it. So, when you ask if every country is in debt, who's the creditor? The answer is central banks. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England. They create the money, they buy the bonds, they are the creditor. But here's the twist, they're not trying to get paid back. Now, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but stay with me. The central banks don't actually want the debt to be repaid. Why? Because if the debt were repaid, the money supply would shrink, the economy would contract, and the system would collapse. Let me show you why. Every dollar in circulation is created through debt. When a bank makes a loan, money is created. When that loan is repaid, that money disappears. If all debt were paid off, there would be no money left in the system. Zero. That's not an exaggeration. That's how the monetary system works. Money equals debt. So the central banks need the debt to keep growing. They need governments to keep borrowing. They need consumers to keep borrowing. They need businesses to keep borrowing. Because if the borrowing stops, the money supply stops growing. If the money supply stops growing, the economy stops growing. If the economy stops growing, the system collapses. That's why every recession is met with the same solution: lower interest rates, print more money, encourage more borrowing. They're not trying to fix the problem, they're trying to keep the debt growing. Because in the system, debt is the product, debt is the goal. And here's the really crazy part: the interest on all this debt, where does that go? It goes to the creditor, the banks, the bondholders, the Federal Reserve. The central banks collect interest on money they created out of nothing. Think about that. They create money with a keystroke, loan it to governments, and collect interest payments forever. It's the perfect scam, and it's completely legal. Now, let me show you who actually benefits from this system. There's an economic principle called the Cantillon effect. It's named after an 18th century economist named Richard Cantillon who figured out something crucial. When new money is created, it doesn't spread evenly through the economy. It enters at specific points, and the people closest to where the money enters get rich. Everyone else gets poorer. Here's how it works. When the Federal Reserve creates new money, who gets it first? Banks. The Fed gives money to banks through various programs. The banks then lend it out or invest it. What do the banks do with it? They buy assets, stocks, bonds, real estate. This drives up the prices of those assets. So if you already own stocks, bonds, or real estate, you get richer. But if you don't own assets, if you just have cash or a salary, what happens to you? By the time the new money reaches you, prices have already gone up. You're paying more for food, rent, gas, everything. But your wages haven't kept up. That's the Cantillon effect. The wealthy get the new money first and use it to buy assets. The poor get the new money last and use it to pay higher prices. It's a wealth transfer from the bottom to the top, and it happens every time new money is created. So, when you ask, who benefits from all this debt? The answer is the people closest to the money creation, the banks, the financial institutions. The ultra-wealthy, they're the real creditors, they're the ones collecting the interest. They're the ones getting richer while everyone else struggles. Here's why this system never stops. Why the debt keeps growing forever. Imagine you're a government. You need $1 trillion this year to pay for everything. Military, social programs, infrastructure, whatever. But you only collect $800 billion in taxes, so you borrowed $100 billion. Next year, you still need $1 trillion, but now you also have to pay interest on last year's $100 billion. Let's say that's $10 billion in interest. So now you need $1.01 trillion, but you still only collect $800 billion in taxes. So you borrowed $110 billion. The year after that, you need to pay interest on for $110 billion of debt. That's $20.5 billion. So now you need $1.02 trillion. You collect $800 billion. You borrowed $120 billion. Do you see what's happening? Every year, the debt gets bigger. Every year, the interest gets bigger. Every year, you have to borrow more just to cover the interest on previous borrowing. It's a debt trap, and there are only 3 ways out. 1. Raise taxes. But if you raise taxes too much, people revolt and the economy shrinks, which means less tax revenue. 2. Cut spending. But if you cut spending, people lose jobs, the economy shrinks, and you collect less tax revenue. 3. Inflate the debt away. Print more money. Let inflation erode the real value of the debt. Guess which option governments always choose? Option 3. They print money. They create inflation. They devalue the currency. And who gets hurt by inflation? The people holding cash, the savers. The middle class. Who benefits? The people holding assets, the wealthy, the creditors. Once again, wealth flows from the bottom to the top. Now, let me zoom out and show you the global picture, because this isn't just happening in America. It's happening everywhere. Every major country is running the same playbook. Borrow, print, inflate, repeat. The United States, $37 trillion in debt. Japan, over 160% debt to GDP. China, officially $14 trillion, but probably much more. The EU, drowning in sovereign debt. Total global debt is over $315 trillion. That's 4 times global GDP. In other words, the world owes 4 times more than it produces in a year. How is that possible? It's possible because the debt isn't meant to be repaid. It's meant to grow. Think of it like a Ponzi scheme. In a Ponzi scheme, you pay early investors with money from new investors. It works as long as new money keeps coming in. The global debt system is the same. Countries pay their old debts by issuing new debts. It works as long as someone is willing to buy the new debt. But what happens when people stop buying? What happens when creditors lose confidence? What happens when everyone realizes the debt can never be repaid? That's when the system collapses. And we're seeing the early signs right now. Here's what's happening right now that should terrify you. Central banks around the world are buying gold at record levels. Why would central banks, who can print unlimited money, be buying gold? Because they don't trust the system either. China has been buying thousands of tons of gold. Russia has been buying gold. India, Turkey, Poland, all buying gold. They're preparing for a currency crisis at the same time. Countries are starting to trade in currencies other than the dollar. China and Russia trade in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. The BRICS nations are developing their own payment systems. They're moving away from the dollar. Why? Because they see what's coming. The dollar is the linchpin of the global debt system. If the dollar collapses, the whole system collapses, and the dollar is showing cracks. US debt is growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. The Federal Reserve has already printed trillions. Inflation is running hot, and foreign countries are slowly, carefully, deliberately reducing their dollar holdings. The creditor is losing confidence in its own system. Let me bring this back to the original question. If every country is in debt, who's the creditor? The answer is simple. The creditor is the central banking system, the Federal Reserve, the network of private banks that have the power to create money out of nothing and charge interest on it. But here's the deeper answer. The real creditor is the system itself. You're not in debt to a person. You're in debt to a system that requires infinite debt growth to survive. And here's what that means for you personally. When your government borrows money, you're the one who pays it back through taxes, through inflation, through a lower standard of living. You didn't take out the loan, you didn't spend the money, but you're paying the interest. The government borrows, the central bank prints, the wealthy buy assets, and you pay for it all through inflation. Your money becomes worth less every year. Your wages don't keep up. Your savings lose purchasing power. Your retirement becomes impossible. That's how the system works. The many pay interest to the few forever. The creditor isn't another country. The creditor is the system, and the system owns you. Now, here's the part they don't want you to understand. You can opt out. Not completely. You still have to pay taxes. You still live in the economy. But you can protect yourself from the debt trap. How? By doing what the wealthy do. By doing what central banks do. By moving out of debt-based money and into hard assets. Gold, Bitcoin. Real estate. Commodities. Things that can't be printed. Things that hold value when currencies collapse. Remember the Camelot effect. The people closest to the money printer get rich. But there's another way to win. Be outside the system. When the Roman denarius collapsed, the people holding gold survived. When the French assignat collapsed, the people holding gold got rich. When the British pound collapsed, the people holding gold preserved their wealth. The pattern repeats. Debt-based fiat currencies always collapse. Always. Because the debt can never be repaid. The system is designed to fail. And when it fails, wealth transfers from currency holders to asset holders. That's not a prediction. That's history. That's mathematics. The question is, when the system fails, and it will fail, which side are you going to be on? Let me give you the simple truth. If every country is in debt, the creditor is the central banking system, the network of institutions that creates money out of nothing and charges interest on it. But the deeper truth is this. The system is designed so the debt can never be paid. Because if the debt were paid, money would cease to exist. Money is debt. Debt is money. They're the same thing, and the interest on all that debt flows to the creditor, the banks, the bondholders, the wealthy, while everyone else, the taxpayers, the workers, the savers, pays for it through inflation and declining living standards. You're not in debt because you're irresponsible. You're in debt because the system requires it. Your government is in debt because the system requires it. Every country is in debt because the system requires it. The debt will never be repaid. It will only grow until the system breaks. And when it breaks, the wealth transfer will be the largest in human history. From the holders of debt-based currency to the holders of hard assets, the question is simple. Which one are you going to be? Here's what you need to understand. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is how the monetary system actually works. The Federal Reserve openly admits they create money to buy government bonds. Banks openly admit they create deposits when they make loans. It's not hidden. It's just not taught. And once you understand it, you can't unsee it. Every dollar you hold is someone else's debt. Every dollar comes with interest. Every dollar loses value over time. The system is designed to transfer wealth from you to the creditor. But you have a choice. You can keep playing the game by their rules. Keep your savings in cash. Keep trusting that somehow things will get better. Or you can do what the insiders do, what the central banks do, what the wealthy have always done. Move into assets that can't be printed, assets that hold value when currencies collapse. The creditor is the system, but you don't have to. Be the debtor. The choice is yours.